Okay, Baltimore City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee, fiscal year 2020 budget for Office of the State's Attorney. I'm Eric Costello, councilman from the 11th District, chair of the committee. To my left is Council President Brandon Scott. To my immediate left, Councilman Leon Pinkett, 7th District, vice chair of the committee. Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark, 14th District. Councilman Zeke Cohen, 1st District. Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District. Councilman Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee. To my right, Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, member of the committee. Councilman John Bullock, 9th District. To my immediate right is Matt Peters, staff to the committee. We have Jeff Amoros representing Mayor Jack Young. Chair. And Marguerite Kern, who's also staff to the committee. Madam State's Attorney, if you would kindly introduce all of your staff that are here. Folks, when State's Attorney recognizes you, if you could just please raise your hand or stand up so we know who you are.
Did you want me to, I have all of my division chiefs from the entire office. Did you want me to introduce everybody?
Please.
Okay.
And then if you could, once you get into your presentation, please keep it at around 10 minutes, please.
Yes, try to. This is my Chief of Administration, Camille Blakefall. I want to start, I guess I'll start here. My Chief Deputy is Michael Schatzow. My Chief of Administration is Nicole. Chief of External Affairs is Nicole Harris-Crest. We have, it might be easier.
Yeah, why don't they introduce
I'm going to just allow everybody to introduce themselves, if that's okay with Mr. Chair.
It is, but we need them to come up and go to the mic if they want to do that.
Oh, they need to come up to the mic?
Because it's televised and folks at home won't be able to hear you.
Okay.
That works too. Yep.
Introduce yourselves to
Good afternoon. I'm Patrick Motzi. I'm the chief of the Central Booking Unit, charging.
Good afternoon. Sandra Goldthorpe, Chief of the Evidence Review Unit.
You can pull that down. Yeah, you can.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Banks. I'm Chief for the General Trial Unit.
Terrence Nash, Crime Strategies.
Good afternoon, Patricia DeMayo, Deputy State's Attorney over the Major Trial Divisions.
Good afternoon, Val Derricks, Deputy of Operations.
Good afternoon, Jan Bledsoe, Deputy of Criminal Intelligence.
Good afternoon, Patrick Jennings, Chief of Felony Narcotics.
Good afternoon, Lauren Lipscomb, Chief of the Conviction Integrity Unit.
Good afternoon, Lisa Goldberg, Chief of the Homicide Division.
Good afternoon, Council. Stephen Trossel, Police Integrity Unit.
Good afternoon, Brandon Marsh, Chief of Economic Crimes.
Good afternoon, Michelle Lambert, Chief of the Special Victims Unit.
Good afternoon, I'm Patrick Seidel, Chief of the Major Investigations Unit.
Good afternoon, Tony Joya, Chief Counsel.
Good afternoon, Derek Green, Director of Community Engagement.
Hello, Deputy Division Chief of Misdemeanor, Jury Trial. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Arcelia Green, Director of Victim Witness Unit.
Good afternoon, Angel White, Director of Crime Control and Prevention.
Good afternoon, everyone. Robert Wojcicki, Juvenile Division Team Captain.
Good afternoon, Lizette Ringgold-Kurtzy. I'm Deputy Chief of the Gun Violence Enforcement Division.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Paul O'Connor from the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, Chief of the District Court. Thank you.
Hello, Darren O'Brien, Management Information Systems.
It's a great assembly line. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Madam State's Attorney.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. As you are very much aware, I want to start with the mission of my office. The mission of the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City is to safeguard communities through the effective prosecution of crime. Emphatically emphasized by my team to my attorneys is that justice is the only barometer of success for our office, which is why our prosecutors are sworn to aggressively pursue justice over convictions in every case. Sometimes, as is stated on my website, justice requires a conviction and a lengthy prison sentence, but other times justice requires dropping all charges and/or diverting a defendant out of the criminal justice system to drug rehabilitation, education, or job training. In the pursuit of justice, our office has met our fair share of challenges as it relates to Baltimore's crime fight and restoring faith in our criminal justice system. But I'm proud that my office has met the unprecedented challenges that we've been faced with these past few years as it relates to the crime fight. And I'm more proud of the fact that my office has met these unprecedented challenges with triumph and remained steadfast in our commitment to accountability, transparency, and also professionalism. These are the values and keys to unlocking the future where community confidence in the criminal justice system is restored, violent repeat offenders are held accountable, and our communities feel safe yet again. As we continue to address our city's public safety challenges, I implore you, each of you, to pass our budget as recommended. I'm grateful for your support as my prosecutors continue to work tirelessly with the police and other public safety partners to combat the current crime increase. And following my remarks, my Chief of Administration, Camille Blakefall, will dive into the specifics of the proposed fiscal year 20 budget. But I'd like to use my time this morning to provide you with a top-level view of how we've prioritized our spending in the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City to more effectively prosecute perpetrators of senseless crime, better serve victims and witnesses, and run a more efficient and effective administration. So if you go to the first slide, you will see the Service 115, Prosecution of Criminals. The prosecution of criminals across Baltimore City is a priority for our agency, with a recommended $35,470,883 allotted in the fiscal year 2020 budget for this effort. As a state attorney, my priorities have been targeting violent individuals, building public trust in law enforcement, and running a transparent and accountable administration. In 2018, we prosecuted over 48,536 cases, including 4,111 felonies in circuit court. Since my first term started in 2015, my office has successfully prosecuted and successfully convicted every single public enemy #1 that's been designated by the Baltimore Police Department as the city's worst of the worst, with the exception of 2 individuals. Of those combined sentences, which include 8 life sentences plus 700 years. In 2018, my talented prosecutors zealously prosecuted on behalf of victims and witnesses of crime. The Felony Trial and Special Victims Unit closed the year with 94 and a 97% conviction rate, respectively. The Conviction Integrity Unit, the only conviction integrity unit in the state of Maryland dedicated to investigating wrongful claims of actual innocence, have exonerated a total of 6 individuals. This year, in the fiscal year 19, 4 of those individuals were exonerated. They served their sentence for over 105 years in prison for murders that they did not commit. Unfortunately, we continue to review thousands as another example of the unprecedented challenges. We continue to review thousands of cases impacted by the indictments and convictions of several members of the Baltimore Police Department Gun Trace Task Force. So far, we've identified 2,500 cases involving these former officers. We've reviewed over 1,300 cases and filed 155 motions to vacate the convictions that relied upon the credibility of those officers, and have approximately 334 motions waiting to be filed. 29 motions have been denied by the judge, despite the fact that these were joint motions. We have, within the budget, you will see, we have the funding for a newly created expungement division, which is responsible for processing expungement applications filed in the district court. Previously, when a petition for expungement was filed, the Baltimore Police Department reviewed the petition and made a recommendation as to whether the petition should be objected to based upon the statutory criteria. However, and since 2017, there has been an unprecedented increase in the number of petitions filed due to the Justice Reinvestment Act, which expanded the crimes which can be expunged to include things such as first, second, and third-degree burglary, possession with intent to distribute, and attempt, conspiracy, or solicitation to commit any of the many enumerated misdemeanors and felonies. Thus far, I can tell you that since the start of that division, we have processed over 10,876 petitions for expungement. You go to the next slide, which is 780, Service 781, which is administration. This service funds the administrative, technological, human resources, and policy and legislative affairs work for the Office of the State's Attorney, with a recommended $7.2 million going to support these efforts. The funding provided under this service also assists in maintaining and improving information systems to support all of the SAO's initiatives, as well as supporting the personnel and technology needs related to body-worn camera video review division. Recognizing that our role as prosecutors isn't exclusive to a courtroom, with the creation of my Policy and Legislative Affairs Division, we've been able to make headway not only in the courtroom, but also in Annapolis. This past legislative session alone, we successfully lobbied for the passage of the Post-Conviction Review State's motion to vacate. This legislation, which will officially become law in October 1st of this year, 2019, will allow judges to grant our prosecutors' request to vacate a conviction in the interest of justice and fairness, especially in cases involving actual innocence, cases tainted by police misconduct, such as the GTTF cases, or cases involving behaviors like marijuana possession that would not be prosecuted in this jurisdiction today. My Body-worn Camera Division, which was created in 2015, has within the past year uploaded and has spent approximately 26,608 hours reviewing more than 111,517 videos. The MIS division services graphic, technical, hardware, software, and network information needs of almost 400 employees. This service, 786 Victim and Witness Services in Baltimore City, as you know, Victim and Witness Services are paramount to any successful prosecution strategy. We're the home of the stop snitching mentality, and I recognize the tremendous amount of work that we all need to do to break down the barriers of distrust that exist among communities and law enforcement. The Victim Witness Unit assists victims and witnesses of crime in Baltimore City by providing counseling and guidance, notification of rights, support in court, and monetary resources and reimbursement where needed. In 2018, the SAO provided services to over 11,605 victims and witnesses and their families. This is almost 20 times more of the services that we provided in 2015 with a mere 546 families. Thanks to grant funding, we've been able to double the size of the Victim Witness Unit. We have victim witness advocates in every division within my agency. For witnesses of crime determined to be at risk of intimidation or retribution, the division also provides victim witness relocation assistance, temporary and permanent new housing, and other limited forms of financial support, including vouchers for food and travel expenses. In 2018, the State Attorney's Office relocated 129 victims, witnesses, and their families. And over the past 2 years, the demand for relocation assistance has increased by almost 30%. Over the past 5 years, the demand has more than doubled, with more than 90 victims, witnesses, and their families already relocated, either temporarily or permanently, in just this year to date. In an effort to combat witness intimidation, earlier this year, you may recall that the State Attorney's Office created a multi-platform victim witness campaign to create awareness around the multitude of services provided by my office and the Victim Witness Services Division, reassuring the community that we are here for them during the entire criminal justice process, from the beginning to the very end and beyond. We offer in our office, as you may or may not be aware, we have the only family bereavement division in the entire state of Maryland where we offer lifetime grief counseling to victims of crime and witnesses. Additionally, my office, beginning in 2017, spearheaded and continues to move forward with the work of combating witness intimidation, a task force, a citywide collaboration that has developed a logic model to implement strategies to effectively and collaboratively address witness intimidation through the city in partnerships with city stakeholders, including BPD, House of Ruth, Sheriff's Office, and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and others. Also within this, last but certainly not least, I'd like to touch upon our efforts to not only serve city youth in the prevention of violence, but to take a holistic approach to the prosecution of crime in a city where 24% of Baltimore's population lives in poverty and 35% of our babies live below poverty. This administration is making significant strides to invest and engage in our youth. Juvenile offenders in Baltimore City becoming increasingly brazen and violent. The number of youth charged as adults has increased by 58% since 2014. This is significant to note, since only juveniles charged with the most heinous crimes are charged as adults. As you all are aware, these include first-degree murder, rape, sex offense, assault, carjacking, and armed carjacking, robbery, and dangerous weapon. According to BPD data, juvenile arrests were down significantly in 2018 from the year before, from 2,379 in 2017 and 911 in 2018. However, these numbers don't appear to be increasing this year, with a total number of arrests year to date at 442 compared to 437 in 2017 year to date. Juveniles charged as adults, again, this is according to DJS data, has increased from 179 in 2017 to 220 in 2018. We as prosecutors are limited by the constraints of the law as to what we can do to hold violent youth accountable, but what we can do is to attempt to reach young people before they get to the criminal justice system, which is why we created the Crime Control and Prevention Division out of my office. Again, the only unit in the entire state that has one out of the State's Attorney's Office. Our Junior State's Attorneys program started in 2015. We've touched more than 159 young people, and thanks to the partnerships that we've been able to develop with the City Council, we usually house the young people back here for 12 weeks, for 6 weeks in the summertime, where we expose them to the positive careers within the criminal justice system. If you're not aware, we partner with the Mayor's Office of Employment Development to actually pay those young people. And again, we've touched more than 160 of those young people. We have the Great Expectations program, which introduces fourth and fifth graders to, again, the positive careers in the criminal justice system. This year, we have Sharp, Leadenhall Elementary, Furman L. Templeton, and Harlem Park Elementary Middle Schools, where we go in once a month, and again, we expose those young kids to positive careers within the criminal justice system. Last but certainly not least, we have our Baltimore pop-ups, which we will be continuing. This is where we looked at the crime trends on Friday nights between the hours of 6 and 9 and saw a drastic increase in youth violence, and we wanted to provide productive activities. Thanks to 37 public-private partnerships, we've been successful in touching more than 5,000 young people in the past 2 years through our pop-up events. They are put on every Friday night between the hours of 6 and 9, free of charge, bowling, skating. This year we're going to the aquarium, we're doing a number of things, but it's also providing substantive services to the families that are also in attendance. With this awesome responsibility, as you can see, we've been very busy under my second term, and although we are a comparatively small city agency, we also have an enormous amount of responsibility. And with this responsibility, 90% of our budget is comprised of personnel costs to ensure that the work is going to continue to be done. However, almost a quarter, and this came up last year, and I wanted to bring it up before you asked, Councilman Pickett, how almost a quarter of our personnel are grant funded. We've been able to increase the grant funding in my office by 31%, but in 2019, my office obtained 26 grants totaling over $6.8 million in grant funding. This funding includes an astounding total of 76 positions within the office. Unfortunately, these 76 positions are not sustainable. Grant funds are not sustainable and are not a long-term solution to addressing the personnel needs of our office. But since my first term in 2015, grant funds have funded, on average, 67 positions in my office each year. This is a problem for several reasons. Grants that are continued annually do not increase annually and therefore do not account for the cost of living increases or allow for continuous competitive salaries. Also, grant funding fluctuates and is unreliable because grants that are available one year may not be available the following year. When the grant funds are discontinued or not available, we're forced to reduce staffing at a time when the crime rate and the record caseloads in our office are already challenging. So it's imperative that we stop relying on grant funds to fund almost a quarter of the staff, including our most experienced and most valuable attorneys, such as those operating in the war room. Instead, these positions need to be funded by the general funds, and although they're not in the general fund this year, I'm bringing it to your attention because we'd be asking for a long-term sort of sustainable solution. Understanding you guys may have questions, I'll turn it over to Ms. Blakefall, for my Chief of Administration, for a more detailed presentation on the fiscal year 20 budget. Thank you.
Ms. Blakefield, if, and you guys have
Blakefall.
three services. Blakefall.
You got it.
I apologize.
It's okay.
And we got 3 services.
We do.
If you could just 30 seconds of service, if there's anything that you want to highlight, because I know the council has a number of questions. I'd like to jump right into that.
Well, I wanted to bring to your attention, I guess, in service 115, I'll bring it back.
That's 2 slides back.
Have to figure out which one goes back. Thank you. Service 115, I'll bring to your attention the single biggest enhancement we've received in the past few years. It's $418,000 for the expungement unit that the state's attorney just referenced. It will it will fund 5 new staff members and computers and ancillary needs. So that's something we wanted to bring to your attention. We've also received and are really grateful for the enhancements we received under Service 781. Those include firewall monies, which, as we know, couldn't be more timely. We'd asked for those months ago because our firewall and systems are aging. Our computers, we need computers. We don't have them to maintain protections against vulnerabilities, and so we are grateful that there is a recommendation that we receive additional funding for both firewall enhancements and security systems. Those are our biggest positives or shifts in this year's budget.
Okay, thank you. On page 505, and maybe this is a question for you, Daniel, of the budget book, there's 5 new positions. I was going to ask about that. I'm assuming those are the expungement specialist folks.
They are.
For $283,000.
Actually, with salary and fringe, it comes closer to $416,000 in the budget line item under Service 115.
Got it. Daniel, in the book on page 505, in the first table under class code 90,000. It indicates 5 positions for a total amount of $283,000 and change.
So that's the salaries. That doesn't include any of the fringe.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. On page 504, expenditures by activity, there's an unallocated appropriation for $1.28 million. That's line item or class code 95 under expenditures by activity. Can you please explain what that is?
Unallocated appropriations are funds that we earmark for the coming fiscal year for grants that we haven't applied for but anticipate applying for. And either because we know they're coming down the pike from the state or the feds, and we want to sort of create a placeholder, which allows us then to receive the funds more expeditiously, as opposed to starting from scratch with an AAO or something like that. And Daniel can speak to it in a more granular fashion if you want to know.
Yes. So our analysts work with the agencies to develop kind of a plan of what they expect to receive in grants for the following year. We budget for it centrally within the admin service, and so that we can separate it out in its own activity. So this allows us the unappropriated so we don't have to come back to council for a supplemental for grants that we can reasonably expect to receive in the next year.
Got it. And on that same page, class code 402, management information services, there was $230K budgeted in fiscal 19. There's nothing recommended for fiscal 20. Do you know what that's in reference to?
We did have a conversation about that. It isn't a reflection of the fact that we've lost money in management information systems. It is likely a reflection that there are grant funds that were in that object number that have been appropriately moved to another part of our budget, and so it was zeroed out and appropriately realigned where they should go.
Got it. Which leads me to my final question. Were you all impacted by the cybersecurity incident?
I will turn that over to my chief of MIS. The short answer is yes and no. If you
yeah, let's bring the chief up.
Okay.
I want
Darren?
to talk to the chief. Give me 1 second. Sure thing. Sorry. So, how are you impacted by the cybersecurity incident?
So we were not directly impacted internally to our network because we had the appropriate firewall and antivirus instituted at the time. It's our services that we receive from the city, which we had to disengage from.
Can you give me an example?
So, ADP, procurement applications.
Oh, okay.
Many of your web-based applications don't function.
Okay, so I got you. So your interaction with city services was
Correct,
was
we cut
hindered,
them.
but you guys were left harmless by the cybersecurity incident.
Except for our telephones.
Well, yes, so telephone. And MTE was hit as well.
So you have VoIP?
Yes,
And
in portions of our agency.
Great. You're the point person at the state's attorney's office for all this stuff, right?
Correct, but I get supervision.
Did the state's attorney or you, ma'am, or you hear at all from the city's Chief Information Officer, Frank Johnson? When was the first time any of you heard from him?
Last week.
That was the first time?
From him directly, yes.
Madam State's Attorney, same?
Yes.
Ma'am?
I haven't heard, I didn't.
Okay, and when were your phones restored?
The phones, the phones were working. It's voicemail that was not working. So the no incoming voicemail could be received.
And you didn't have any communication from anyone at BSID about that?
Not from BSIT, from MTE, and that was from us reaching out. BSIT, I guess, contacted us most formally in the last week. And yesterday, as of yesterday, I had a meeting with BSIT staff and 2 private vendors. And if I would love to share that conversation with you.
Oh, please do.
So, for example, for underfunding related to IT, BSIT is offering services through the private vendors at a cost of about $30,000 a year for 1 year, and then after that, they're leaving the agencies to fund that.
And this is $30,000 for what?
Per endpoint security and layer 2 security, which is capturing packets. It's 2 different ways to prevent vulnerabilities, 2 newer different ways.
Got it.
But again, they're offering it for a year, and then they're leaving the agencies hang. Or I shouldn't say that. We don't have the funding to support those additional tools in year 2.
So they charged you $30,000?
They're not charging us. They're allowing that for the first year.
Okay.
I was told it was an olive branch to connect services. But in year 2, when asked where that funding would come from, that would be left to the agencies.
And they're not providing that service. They have a vendor that provides that service, correct?
They're providing the funding, but the vendors are providing the service, yes.
And is there expectation that you use the same vendor?
If it's up to us. They're leaving that to us.
Okay.
Again, there's no funding for it if we were to select it. And you would have to use say 30 to 90 days for setup. So 9 months of service, and then the service would be turned off essentially if there's no funding.
Okay. I've got a meeting to go to. I'm going to turn to the council president, and then I know Councilman Schleifer has a spin-off question on this, but when I come back, I want to talk about disaster recovery, COOP, and a patch management policy.
Love to.
Mr. President.
Thank you.
Hey, how are you?
You can be seated for now. Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you, Madam State's Attorney, for being here and for all your hard work. I guess the first question would be best answered by you, and I know it's something that you believe in. As you know, I'm asking every agency head about their belief in their implementation of equity, and while you don't have to follow the equity assessment legislation, can you just talk about your work and how you're trying to implement a lens of equity and how you guys go about doing your business as the Office of the State's Attorney?
I'm sorry, I'm not following your question. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So last year, we passed a equity legislation in Baltimore, racial equity, gender equity.
Oh, yep.
You don't have to follow it, but I know from communicating with you that you're trying to implement equity in the work that is done in your office. Can you talk about how you're implementing that and how you want to make that a part of what you're doing as the State's Attorney?
So absolutely. I think it's incredibly important, especially as prosecutors, to understand the disproportionate impact that the criminal justice system has had on communities of color, and that awesome amount of discretion that not only impacts defendants and victims, but has collateral consequences on our communities. So I can tell you that one of the things that we've emphasized, and this is with every employee of the State's Attorney's Office, is racial equity. This past year, we brought in the Equal Justice Institute, Brian Stevenson from Alabama, and we actually had a race and equity training that was a mandatory training for every single employee in the State's Attorney's Office. We followed that up with this past, a week ago, we had trauma-informed care approaches, in which, again, it was a requirement for every employee within my office so that they understood the application of that discretion and that awesome power that they have. And that was the second part of the training. The first part of the training was actually talking about exonerees from across the country and the importance of utilizing our discretion to ensure that we're exonerating those that are wrongly accused, convicted, and incarcerated. So we are very much trying to instill race and equity in our daily practices. I'm actually set up for a call this week where we're going to actually be working and partnering with other organizations, including the Fair and Just Prosecution Initiative, where essentially we're going to try to bring in an analyst to kind of look at the data with regard to our plea bargains and race and equity and see the breakdown for the racial sort of, if at all, if there are any racial disparities within our plea bargaining. So that call is actually set up for Friday, and I'm hopeful that we can implement that sometime this summer.
Thank you, and thank you, ma'am, and I hope the other agency heads are watching and heard that response. My second thing is actually related to cases and something that you and I talk about a lot. You know that gun violence and gun cases, I believe, are the crux of what's the crime, a violent crime in Baltimore.
Right.
And you know nothing angers me more than this refrain from outsiders and people in city government or other departments, mainly the police department, about the reasons that we can't get a hold of crime, being that cases are being dismissed or they're being null pros. And when a few months ago I asked them what I thought was a simple question, well, tell me how many of our cases, your gun cases that you're complaining about that are being null pros, how many of them were null pros because they were kicked to the federal prosecutor? They couldn't tell me. And then, as you know, in a follow-up conversation with you, I found out that there was a request to have data analysts put into your office so that we can see that, so that we can have that conversation to show, hey, these are the gun cases where they were null pros because, or whatever, probation before judgment, because there were issues with the case, or evidence didn't get over in time, or there were issues in your office, or there was issues with the judge. Can you talk about why you think something like that will be important and how that will look and operate, so that would help myself and my colleagues figure out how to make that happen? Because what we don't want to continuously happen is have all the back and forth. You know, I'm one that just wants to come to a solution to the problem and figure out how we can move forward, because I think that it will be critical not just for you and your office, but as we, and because Director Martin is still here, as we coordinate public safety in Baltimore, but also as we implement a consent decree and implement training and policies and practices, knowing what mistakes are consistently being made and ending up in people who should not be back out on the street, being back out on the street, is critical. And right now, we just don't have access to that data.
So I appreciate your question, Mr. President. What I can tell you is that we collect certain data, and it's more general data on all of our cases by unit, right? Where essentially we look to see why the cases are dismissed, if there's something that we need to look at internally, if it's a management issue. I'll give you an example. When we first started collecting the data, you know, a number of our assistant state's attorneys were not filing the disposition forms, right? They weren't filling out the reason and justification. But by collecting the data, we were able to go in, re-emphasize the importance of collecting that information. And what we try to do is on a monthly basis put that information online so that it's transparent. But since the start of my administration, what I've been very clear with the two mayors that I've worked, three mayors, well, I haven't sat down with Mayor Jack Young quite yet, but the two mayors that I worked with is that if they give us the resources, we would be able to do an analysis. And I'll just give you an example. When we receive why we can't be the statistician for the criminal justice system, which often they've tried to put the burden on us to do. And when we receive requests for data from the court, from Baltimore Police Department, from MOCJ, from City Council, typically a request is for information about a type of crime particular to a particular period. To provide that information, we have to define the request. Gun cases is very broad. Which specific charges are you looking for, the gun count or other, sometimes more important counts. Then we have to identify the CJIS codes for those charges, which involves research if we're looking at previous years as the codes change. It also requires program software. Almost invariably, the requests that we get are not covered by the routine reports that we run and we publish on a regular basis without modification. Thus, we have to from a program for a specific, we have to program it for a specific request and a specific report. The more information requested about a case, guilty, not guilty, stet, no pros, sentence, judge, the more difficult, time-consuming, and expensive it is to program and review and to run the report and validate it, because once we run the report, we want to make sure that the information is accurate. So you have to validate it. We have to spot check on a random basis to make sure that the report is accurate. And validation is crucial for the release of any sort of data that's coming out of our office. And so this takes a great deal of resources, and one of the things that we've been asking for we would love to collaborate and to be able to collect that specific data pertaining to these types of cases, but we would need a data analyst in order to do that. Now, we have a crime strategies unit that is in place, but what we do in our crime strategies unit is we have more of a predictive analysis that we conduct. And so if given the resources, we would be more than happy to provide that data as much as we could.
And thank you, and you know that you have a commitment from me, and we'll be working with the mayor in finance, and I know Director Martin is committed to that as well as figuring out how to do that. And
Mr. President, I have a breakdown for you, so I can provide that to you as well.
Yes, please. And Mr. Ramos, this is something I think when we're talking about efficiency and effectiveness, but also about measurable goals, not just for the state's attorney's office, but for the police department as well. These are the kind of things that we're going to need to see. So to be clear, from the administration, I don't want to hear from them about them not being able to do their job because of the results of these cases when they don't truly know the result of the cases. They just know the basic outcome and not the direct information or deep dive information. Madam State's Attorney, my last question for this round is something else. Can you give us a breakdown or tell us how many cases you have now reviewed that were connected to Gun Trace Task Force,
Yes.
or what I call Violent Crime Impact Section cases? And in those, can you give us a breakdown of the outcomes of the cases that have been reviewed thus far? And how many you have left to review?
Yes. So I can tell you, and I talked a little bit about this in my opening remarks, Mr. President, but from what we've identified thus far from all of the GTTF officers that were involved, we just recently had to add an additional 5 officers to that count. Originally, it was 2,100 cases that we had identified. And just for your own reference, what we're doing is we're doing a materiality assessment of each and every one of the cases. So if any of those officers are involved and they're a material witness to the case, clearly we cannot rely upon their credibility. And so what we're essentially doing is that we're going through, and if we have to rely on them, we're asking to vacate the convictions of individuals. As you know, or you may or may not know, there is no sort of legal mechanism to be able to do that. As of October 1st, thanks to my Policy and Legislative Affairs team, there will be a legal mechanism for us to vacate convictions, but we've identified now over 2,500 cases involving these officers. We've reviewed, and this review is not just, it's a dual sort of process. It's our law clerks that do the initial review, and then our ASAs follow behind. And we've reviewed over 1,300 cases. We've filed 155 motions to vacate convictions. And as I stated in my opening, about 20% of those, approximately 29 of them, despite the fact that we're the ones filing the motions, we're the ones arguing the motions, we're the ones reaching out to the defense attorneys to join our motion to vacate, 29 of them have been denied by the bench, essentially despite the fact that it's joint motions, because the bench has basically said there's no legal mechanism to be able to do it. So now, as of October, we will have a legal mechanism to do it. However, we currently have about 334 motions that are waiting to be filed. And the reason why we have not filed them is because, again, we'll take the chance of sending it to a particular judge that may deny our motion, when if we hold on to it until October 1st, then we can file it with a legal mechanism that will then be law.
Thank you, Madam State's Attorney. You might not have this, and if not, I can get it from you earlier. Does anyone know the earliest date of a case that you review involving GGTF? My guess it will be around 2008-ish, but
if you give me one moment, I
the
can check.
latest date.
I'm being told it's approximately 2006.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam State's Attorney. Just a couple questions. On page 508 in the budget book.
One second, Mr. Chair, and for my colleagues, before the chair asks his questions, I want to note for my colleagues, Madam State's Attorney, that with those cases going back to 2006, that you should be reminded that the Gun Trace Task Force didn't exist in 2006. Thank you.
So it wouldn't be at the time that the task force was in existence.
I know.
It would
Yeah.
be the particular office pertaining, the officer relevant to what the allegations of that officer is.
Yes, ma'am. I just want my colleagues to know that this is bigger than one unit of 6 people and goes a lot deeper than that.
Thank you, President Scott. So page 508, Service 781, under expenditures by activity has body cameras for 1.5 million. Is that actual equipment, or is that specific to personnel review? How is that 1.5 million used?
If I may, Mr. Vice Chair, may I
Okay,
defer?
that's fine.
The allocation for body-worn camera unit staff and personnel is encompassed in that line item. So what you're seeing is the staff, the salary, which means salary and fringe, as well as the equipment and any software licensing costs. Whatever we're allocated to run our body-worn camera unit or division falls there.
So how many staff is that?
I don't know. We should be able to see on the next line item. 17, I've been told.
And you said it also includes equipment as well?
Well, we get very limited money. This year we just got about a little over $1,000 for software upgrades. Last year we got a bigger enhancement of about $35. But yes, when you do see a jump, an enhancement in body-worn camera for software, storage is a big issue that we'll continue to face, where we store all of this footage. That all would fall in that line item.
But what you're saying is that the majority of the 1.5 is related to 17 positions.
And 90% of our budget is related to staff, so it would correlate. My apologies, I'm getting over a cold.
Keep it. I'll fight my own. This is a more broader question, and maybe you've already spoken to some of it. When I look at the entire state's attorney's budget, going back to fiscal year 2018 to this year's recommendation, it appears to be a 30% increase in the budget. And I realize that most of that's coming from the state and Fed. So I mean, FY 2018 was 36 million. The FY 2020 recommendation is 46. And I see, 3.3 from Fed, 6 million from the state, which is pretty significant increase when I look at all of the other agencies. We don't see this kind of increase. So can you speak to, the activities associated with such an increase from FY 2018 to now? Was it related to specific activities, or,
Well, I can give you a brief and dirty overview of how
Okay,
our
yeah.
grants funding works. Because
Okay, so
what you're referring to is our grants dollars. If you look at the general fund line item, it has been an incremental growth, 1.8 down to 0.8, up to 1.3 this year, 18, 19, and 20. But what you're noticing,
Yes.
and we're very proud of this, is our our grant funding work, where we actually go out and seek grants that support the programs and initiatives that the state's attorney would like to undertake. And we got a significant grant in 2017 under the it's called the VOCA grant, the Victims of Crime Act grant. It was a federal grant passed through through GOCAP through the state, and that has generated 3.8 thousand or 3.4 thousand for 17 and 18, and then 1.8 thousand for 19, and we will apply again for 20. So that is like the single biggest jump in the millions, and that's what you're seeing here.
Right, which means that we can't afford to see a big decline if it goes the opposite direction.
Which is what the state's attorney was referring to in her remarks earlier. We fund 76 positions, just under 1/4 of our staff with this money. We need the staff. We go after the grants, we get the grants, but they're not a sure thing. We could lose them at any time.
Okay, Councilman Burnett, but I have a cough drop for you.
Oh, you're the best.
And it's a real special. I'll put you on.
All right. Thank you, Madam State's Attorney, and to your team. And also want to start, just like I did the last presentation, thank you for your office's commitment to working with the Human Trafficking Collaborative and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. It's been a great partnership, and looking forward to continuing that work, especially with the trainings. The questions I had were around page 503, service number 115. Can you speak a little bit about the interagency war room coordination, the objectives of the war room, and the outcomes of that initiative?
That is a grant that precedes this administration or the state's attorney. It's a grant that the office has been receiving for a number of years. I don't even know how far it goes back. It goes back three administrations. It supports the efforts, and Madam, would you like to extend up? I don't know if I know the nuances of it, but it largely supports the salary and fringe of some of our more senior prosecutors handling matters in the charging unit. Is that right? And also maybe some of the felony units. I'd have to look and see what the list is, but it funds some of our more senior prosecutors looking at some of our most serious issues.
And if you want more specifics, I know Mike can talk to it as well.
Patrick Motze is distinguished, great silver-haired gentleman in the front row, is the head of our charging unit, and the War Room grant primarily supports the work that's done in central booking, which allows us to staff it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is our essential unit. That unit is never not staffed, despite weather, despite holidays, despite anything. So they are always there, and they are there in order to make bail recommendations and review arrests that come in, both to advise the police about the sufficiency of the evidence for the arrests, constitutionality of the arrests, but also to make bail recommendations, with the idea being that people with significant criminal histories should get a no bail recommendation, but that we have reviewed it and we can make a thorough and persuasive argument to the commissioner for bail, and then document the recommendation and the reasons for it, so it's available the next day at a bail review before a district judge.
Okay. And the next one I had was, sorry, there's the Maryland Criminal Intel Network. Is that under the same umbrella?
It's all
under 115.
That's the EMSIN grant. That is under 115 as well. That is not. We are not the primary. We are not the primary applicants of that grant. BPD is the primary applicants, and we join BPD and others to be a sub to that grant. This will be our second year receiving funds through BPD for our work. It provides staffing and resources to allow for the identification and prioritization of criminal offenders, gangs, and violent criminal networks that are operating within Baltimore City jails, and those affected with juvenile, and those affiliated with juveniles.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess we can sit down and go into further details. The first I'd seen either of those items, so we're just a little bit more interested in what that was all about. Thank you.
Councilman Slifer.
Hey, can we get the IT guy back up here?
Frank got somebody watching over you.
Oh, you know he do.
Good afternoon again.
You got your own personal attorney over there?
Absolutely, one of the best.
He is. Okay, so what company did they say this that they were offering you?
So Red Eye is one, and secure.
I
is-
take notes on my phone, so I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
no
just
problem.
writing this
I do the same thing. Red Eye,
down. Yeah.
which is an endpoint client software install,
Okay.
and Secure, which is a layer 2 packet sniffer, which is the one, if approved by the front office, would be the option we would take. But again, we can't afford to support it year 2.
Do we know if these? So are they currently using that service for some of the other agencies?
So
Like,
from,
did they tell you that they've already gotten a few agencies to accept that?
some have.
Okay. Do you guys know budget if that went through the Board of Estimates?
We don't have any information about that.
So, okay. Do we know if this company's actually even charging, or if this is a sales gimmick for the first year? We'll throw you a bone because you're going through a crisis, but then we're going to charge you 30 grand an agency.
Great question. We asked that in a different format in our meeting. I know that
More to the point, so so what was the response to that?
I believe that Red Eye. You would have to listen. You have to talk directly to BSIT and their director.
Well, they don't call us back, so
Right.
we'll talk about it during their budget hearing. But
Okay.
what was their response to you?
I believe that Red Eye is a new endpoint security software company. I think they were formed in 2017. But Secure, the packet sniffer layer 2, I believe the city's been using, I'm not sure, maybe 2 years. You'd have to ask them directly. But that's a great question.
You're saying the city's already been using this layer 2?
That's my belief from the conversation. I'm not privy to.
Well, I mean, obviously what we've been using hasn't been working, so I don't know why we'd use more of the same. So they didn't actually give you an answer of if they were physically paying for that service or not?
Yes, I don't know. I didn't ask them directly whether BSIT was paying for the service, but I imagine they are. They must be. Or, so.
Gotcha. So
Perhaps
can I make a request to get, not of you, of the budget office to find out if in fact any of these agencies that have accepted this generous offer, who those agencies are, and also how much is being paid to either Red Eye or Layer 2 or any other vendors that they're promoting. So if we can just know how much money has already been committed and what this year 1 trial will cost. And if they're also, obviously Layer 2 is obviously an approved vendor if we've been using them for a couple years, but if Red Eye is actually a city approved vendor.
So Secure was used for the 911 hack.
Okay.
That's when they were first
We will follow
called
up and respond.
You get that information?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess the other question is not really for you to answer, but if you guys know if any legal cases were impacted by this, because obviously the flow of information from the police department to you guys happens on a minute-by-minute basis. So how is that impacted?
We've had extreme difficulty communicating. They do not have email. So the standard communication between ASA, other than the phone call, is through email to an officer or even to the evidence units in BPD. So absolutely, from day one, we had significant problems communicating, and I believe to today. I mean, recently I heard that BPD's email may be back up standing, but I don't think that's accurate.
Right, so how many, do we know how many cases have been impacted by the fact that there's been no workaround created for BPD to give you this information that you
I don't think I have that answer.
I don't think we can tell you that X number of cases have been lost because we couldn't proceed, but cases are impacted because, for example, through the excellent work of Sandy Goldthorpe, who's the chief of our evidence review unit, we have worked out with the various police laboratories shared drives to status where the drug tests are, what are the gun test results, what DNA test results are. And we had to shut those down because we got very good advice from our IT people about shutting off all our connections with the police department. So for a number of weeks, we had to run back and forth to the police department to get information and to follow up information. So we have limited resources. When we apply them in inefficient ways, it have impacts on cases, but I don't think anybody can calculate for you a precise number and a precise impact.
All right, because I mean, I know that there's certainly been an impact, because those in district court could tell you that I show up there voluntarily, and I sit and watch cases that impact my district. And I was in district court, I think it was within a week after this happened, and they may not have recognized me because I was probably wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And what I found was that there was officers that didn't know they were supposed to be there at the time, and also the ASAs were struggling to get just get a hold of anybody to get information. And so certainly, I mean, we could be talking about hundreds of cases at this point that have been impacted by this breach.
Certainly, those are issues which unfortunately our assistants deal with almost every day, but they were greatly magnified during this period.
Gotcha. So, do we know if moving forward, is there like you guys have a proposal for BPD for like a workaround on how they can accommodate, how they can make up for these challenges?
Well, the emails, as I understand it, are back up, and the shared drives are back up now. But in terms of what to do about those cases, certainly if cases had to be null pros because an officer did not appear, we will look at the case. If it's significant enough and we can bring that case back, and that would be a way to deal with an officer who did not appear.
Gotcha. Okay, so it will impact your numbers at the end of the year because of this whole breach.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Stokes.
This is for our state's attorney. My question is, first of all, I want to thank you for giving our older adults a second chance in terms of opportunities instead of being incarcerated, and giving our young people an opportunity up front and not on the back end. My question is, you requested 5 positions for expungement, and I think that's important. Can you explain why in the courthouse? Because I think maybe a couple of them could be in some of the community centers, because sometimes people don't have transportation. And those 5, if you get the funding, can some of them be in the community centers, maybe in some of the human services centers, so those persons that don't have transportation and need expungement done, they have an opportunity to go to either one of those centers?
So I would love to be able to partner with another organization to be able to do that. And we did that with Mayor Pugh. She had an expungement workshop where several members of my team came out. We try to partner with the Public Defender's Office. You can recall when we had our community day in court, where we actually did rebounding from a criminal conviction, and we went out and we talked about how we go about the application process for it. I guess I'm just limited in the resources to be able to go externally and to be able to provide that, from my staff being out in the community and providing that. But we are more than happy to try to collaborate with the Public Defender's Office or any other sort of resource to be able to do it.
Well, if you do get the funding for that, I would like to work with your office and making sure we put some of those locations right in the community, because I think that has a great impact on people that can now just go to those centers and get that expungement done, because that's real important that be taken care of. So I'll be in touch.
And I appreciate that, Councilman. What I can do, and we're always looking for suggestions, is that we've taken Community Day in Court and we brought it to court in the community. And so one of the things that we can do, and hopefully we can try to collaborate with your office, is we can do that. We do it every 4 months. We try to do it on a quarterly basis. Is that every 3 months? Every 3 months. We try to do it on a quarterly basis. It's been every 4 months. But essentially, if we can focus on rebounding from a criminal conviction and having the resources to be able to do it, I would love to be able to do it and collaborate in your district in
Sure,
particular.
thank you. Thank you.
Madam State's Attorney, with Service 786, Victim and Witness Services, do you have a number of, I guess, victims or witnesses that that service provides resources for? How many, for example, how many victims do you work with, or how many families?
Yes. So in 2015, we had 546 victims and witnesses that we worked with. Because we've been able to get those additional grant funds, because we've been able to double the size of the unit, and because we have victim advocates in every single division run by Arcelia Green, we've been able to increase those services by 20 times. So last year alone, in 2018, we serviced in 1 year 11,605 victims and witnesses and their families. Despite the 30% increase in demand for relocation, we've serviced just last year 129 families that we relocated on a temporary or permanent basis. And this year, I'm sorry, Councilman, but this year, so far, we're projected to even increase that even more. It's year to date, more than 90 victims and witnesses that we've had to relocate, and we're only in 6 months in the year.
No, I was just going to say those are some staggering numbers, it's I guess a credit to your team that's working in a particular area. I guess I like Councilman Slafer. I had firsthand opportunity to see the trauma that the families go through in situations like that, and so for them to be able to get those resources at a place where they need them the most, I mean, it's critical. I did have one other question, and then I'll see if my colleagues have anything else. With the recent policies related to not prosecuting marijuana cases, I think part of it, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why not to, but part of it was to free up resources in your office. Can you speak to how that's positively impacting the ability of your team to be able to take on more cases or more workload because we're not prosecuting those cases?
So absolutely. One of the things that I've been very clear about is there were 3 reasons why we decided not to prosecute marijuana convictions. First and foremost, there is absolutely no public safety value. This was not a decision that we arrived at overnight. We did a great deal of research, and when you look at other places that have legalized marijuana, there has not been an increase in violent crime. So we know that there's no direct sort of correlation. So there's no public safety value. We know that we have limited resources. As you guys comb through it, you understand more than anybody else. We have very limited resources, and so it's counterproductive to the limited resources that we have. And so because we've stopped, and the last reason, before I go into that, is that we know that there is not a disparate use among white and black people when it comes to marijuana consumption, yet there is an extreme disparate and discriminatory enforcement of these types of laws. And one of the things that, was very problematic for me, and this was also within your district, since the decriminalization of marijuana, the officers have to issue citations. Well, in 2015, 89% of those citations were only being issued to black people. 2016, 94%. 2017, 95%. But this was the most staggering statistic, and the one that I found most problematic was that 42% of the citations that they were issuing out of all of the 9 police districts were being issued to the Western District, which happens to be disproportionately impoverished and 95% black. So what we've essentially said is that we will not be prosecuting marijuana possession cases in the city of Baltimore. We're not going to be complicit in that discriminatory enforcement. We've moved to vacate the convictions of almost 5,000 convictions. But that piece around the resources, right? Like when you think about the time that it takes to, not just from a state's attorney perspective, but from several agency perspective, you have to arrest the individual. First, you're targeting the individual. You're arresting the individual. They then go through my central booking where they're fingerprinted and they have to go through this whole process where we check the charges. That's resources from the BPD, that's resources from state's attorney's office. They then will send it depending on, the record of the individual, whether that's gonna go down to, depending on the amount, it would then go down to either district court or the felony court, right? The felony screeners are gonna make a determination as to whether it's gonna stay in district court or in felony court or be transferred up. So when you think about the CDS analysis that they then have to, the BPD has to then determine that this is a controlled dangerous substance, right? We're taking resources away from the BPD actually examining firearms examinations and, you know, those unsolved, we had a 316 homicides last year and a 26% year-end clearance rate, right? We're taking away those resources. Then when it comes into district court, right, my prosecutors have to prepare for trial. So that means they have to call the officers and they got to get them prepared for trial. Then they come in and we have an overtime issue, right? Like we talk about the overtime, but then we call the officers in, and if they're not working, guess what? We got to sign off on their overtime slip. Then it's assigned to a public defender. The public defender is then reviewing these, and then we have to then prepare for trial. And depending on whether or not they pray a jury trial, right, it's going to go from district court to circuit court. And if they pray a jury trial, then we have to pick 12 members. So it's a great deal of resources for something that has no public safety value. What I can say is that, you know, thus far, we've had 29 cases where we've released individuals without charges that have gone through the central booking. And I know that we had some pushback from the police, but I think that the message is being sent, where you only have 29 cases where they've actually made an arrest for only marijuana. Right. And overall, about 149 cases that have been impacted. Either we've dropped the marijuana charge in district court or in circuit court. So I think it's starting to resonate, and we're utilizing those resources to go after violent individuals. You know, I'm able to staff my gun violence enforcement division, as opposed to we're moving some of my prosecutors out of the district court where the caseloads are down because we're no longer prosecuting marijuana, and we're able to move those prosecutors up to circuit court where they can focus on violent offenders. But it's a great deal of resources, not just from my office, but from other agencies as well.
Thank you. Council President Scott? Are there any other questions from any of my colleagues? Being no more questions, thank you, Madam State's Attorney.
Thank you, Mr.
This hearing is now in recess.
Thank you.